In every city and town in Israel, you will come across a street called Herzl Street. Who's Herzl anyway? Shalom, my friends. This is the Kiva Gersh with Israel in 5, where we give you everything Israel in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, want to keep the conversation going, please do so below in the comments. Herzl is referring to Theodor Herzl, the father, if not the grandfather, of the Zionist movement. He was born in 1860 in Budapest, and he grew up in a generation and amongst Jews, including his parents, including his family, who believed that the answer to anti-Semitism, which was raging through Europe, was assimilation. The less Jewish we are, the less they'll hate us. The more like them we become, the less they'll hate us. And they really believe this. Many, many Jews believed that in those times throughout Europe. But he realized that that was not the way. In the 1890s, in 1894 specifically, he was covering as a journalist. He worked as a journalist for a paper from Vienna. He was covering a story in France called the Dreyfus Affair, where Alfred Dreyfus, a Jew who was a member of the French army, was falsely accused of treason, of selling military secrets to Germany. He was found guilty in the trial, and he was publicly humiliated in a ceremony that was held to break his sword, take off his ranks, and send him into exile. Well, Theodor Herzl was there as a journalist covering the story. And as he's there writing notes, he hears people in the crowd screaming, chanting, "Death to the Jews." He said, what does this have to do with anything? Right? Because he's Jewish, all the Jews should be killed. What's going on here? And he realized in that moment that anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is alive and well, even in France, the first place in all of Europe to give Jews rights and emancipation and citizenship. And he felt like we got it all wrong. Assimilation is not the way. And he became a part of, and then obsessed, and then the leader of the Zionist movement, which had started a good decade and a half before that in the early 1880s. And he realized that that is the way. Jews going back to their homeland, building up a country, a state for themselves, leading their own fate and determining their own future. That's the way to ensure an end to anti-Semitism, at least to be the subjects and the targets of anti-Semitism, and to create a world and a reality and a home for them to protect themselves. He quickly became enthralled with this movement, and within 3 short years, by 1897, he organized the first ever World Zionist Congress, inviting Jewish delegates from all over Europe to come and talk about something that people had not really talked about publicly in an organized way ever, which is returning home to the Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. That was 1897. And he stood up at that conference, that first ever World Zionist Congress, and he said something pretty amazing. He said, if not in 5 years, then in 50 years, we will see ourselves a Jewish state. Well, he was wrong about the 5 years, but he was almost exactly right about the 50 years, because about 50 and a half years later, in 1948, the Jewish state was founded in the city of Tel Aviv. Now, unfortunately, Theodor Herzl only didn't get to see the creation of the state of Israel. He only lived to 1904, 44 years old. People say he kind of ran himself into the ground because he was literally crisscrossing the world, meeting with all kinds of world leaders, from the Ottoman Empire to Germany, to try to convince them to back this idea and to help the Jews reestablish themselves and reconstitute Jewish sovereignty in the Jewish homeland. He put everything, all of his efforts, all of his energy into this movement. And while he didn't get to see the state itself, he really pushed the movement forward. Like I said, it was already going for about 15 years, but it was going kind of slow. And with him, he really brought it to the world stage. He brought it to the attention of the world, which is exactly what this movement needed. He visited the land of Israel. He himself actually didn't speak Hebrew. He wasn't even sure that that should be the language of the new Jewish state. Eventually was convinced of that. But we have to understand it was the 1890s, early 1900s, where things were still in flux. Things were being figured out. What is this movement going to look like? Where are we going? And how do we get there? And for people to have a leader like him, he was very charismatic. He was an amazing speaker. And he was also very distinguished looking. He gave a real professional and organized and serious look, so to speak, to the Zionist movement, something that they were lacking before. It was an amazing thing. His face really became synonymous with symbolism and really became this symbol for the Jewish return to the Jewish homeland. Again, Jews had for 2,000 years thought about it, prayed about it, wrote about it, believed in one day that we're going to go back, but it really was Herzl taking the Zionist movement and leading it in a whole new kind of way, which gave it a whole different kind of direction, a whole different seriousness, and a whole different focus. And because of that, he became known as the father, again, if not the grandfather of the Zionist movement. And that's why you'll find his name everywhere in Israel. The main military cemetery in Israel, in Jerusalem, is named after him, Mount Herzl. That's where he's actually buried, though he died in Europe and was buried there. Eventually, his body was brought to the land of Israel and reburied in the cemetery, which would be named after him. And that is Herzl, that is Theodor Herzl. And again, that's why in every city, in every town in Israel, you'll find a street named after him to give him the honor that he so much deserves.